The night Victor Morelli was meant to choose his bride, the world held its breath. Cameras flashed, violins sang, and 120 women waited to be crowned queen of the underworld. Then the champagne spilled. A single drop of gold across his black suit, and the room froze. The server who caused it, Teresa, trembling, eyes downcast, should have been dismissed on the spot. But instead of rage, the feared Mafia boss stared at her as if he'd seen a ghost. Why her? Why did his expression change from fury to silence, from dominance to something almost haunted? And why did her hands shake as if she already knew this man, and feared what his eyes might remember? Before the night ended, someone would bleed, a secret would surface, and the girl who wasn't supposed to be seen would become the only name Victor couldn't forget. Enjoying the story already? Make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell, so you never miss another story where love dares to bloom in the darkest places. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I'd love to know who's out there in the quiet. The chandeliers of the Morelli Grand Hotel ballroom blazed like captive stars, pouring gold over silk gowns and glittering eyes. Violins swelled through the air, a symphony of wealth and danger beneath crystal light. Cameras flashed. The world was watching. 120 women stood poised beneath that glow, laughing too loudly, smiling too brightly, each one desperate to be chosen. Tonight, the Mafia Council's most powerful heir, Victor, would select his bride before the world. The union would bind territories, silence enemies, and crown a queen beside a man whispered to have no heart. Among them, Teresa moved unseen. A black and white uniform instead of diamonds, a silver tray instead of ambition. Her smile practiced, her wrists trembling beneath the hidden bruise that bloomed like a secret confession under her sleeve. Champagne flutes chimed as she wove between satin and perfume, pretending she belonged nowhere. The crowd shifted, a hush spread, an instinctive collective stilling before she even saw him. Victor Morelli. Tailored darkness, unreadable eyes, a man whose mere silence could end a life or save one. When he entered, even the music seemed to bow. Cameras turned, women straightened. Teresa didn't. Her only thought was to disappear, but fate is cruel in its timing. The tray tipped. Champagne splashed, gold against black. The sound cracked the ballroom's hush. Gasps fluttered like startled birds. Teresa froze. Humiliation burned up her neck. Every eye turned toward her. And then his. Victor looked at her. Not with anger, not with pity, with recognition. A flicker of something dangerous, almost human. Like he saw beyond her trembling hands, straight into the pain she'd spent years trying to hide. And for one impossible heartbeat, the monster the world feared looked like a man who'd once known mercy. Why does the feared boss look at her like he knows her pain? Teresa didn't remember how she made it out of the ballroom. One moment she'd been standing beneath the chandeliers, heart thundering as the world stared. The next, she was outside in the rain, her apron soaked and her breath coming in broken gasps. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. The night air smelled of wet asphalt and perfume, but all she could taste was shame. It burned behind her eyes. Inside that hall, people laughed again. The music swelled, pretending nothing had happened. Only she remained a ghost on the steps, invisible in a city that never noticed the ones who served its wine. She walked until her feet hurt. Past the line of black cars waiting to drive princesses home, past the marble fountains into the narrow streets that smelled of oil and smoke. Her shoes splashed through puddles until she reached the back of the cheap apartment she called home. The lock stuck, as it always did. She pushed it open and slipped inside the dimness. Her room was small, a single bulb, a broken chair, and an envelope on the counter with the landlord's stamp. Overdue. She exhaled softly and peeled off her soaked blouse. Beneath the fabric, purple marks bloomed like wilted violets across her wrist. She traced them with 2 fingers, remembering how they got there. Flashback. It was 2 years ago, in a kitchen that smelled of spilled whiskey and fear. Her boyfriend. No, her mistake. had a deck of cards spread across the table. Each loss meant another curse, another bruise, another promise that tomorrow would be different, until the day his debt collectors came and she learned that he'd used her name to borrow what he couldn't pay back. She'd begged him not to. He'd smiled with blood on his teeth and said, "You're all I own, Tess." That night she'd run, and she'd promised herself never again. Never to trust, never to look twice at a man with a smile that could ruin her. Her hand trembled now as she filled a kettle, the same kettle she'd used to keep herself alive when everything else had gone cold. A knock startled her. It wasn't violent but steady, 3 measured taps. She froze. The door opened before she could answer. Teresa Quinn? The man who stepped inside wore black gloves and a gray suit. His expression was unreadable. "Your payment's late." Her throat closed. "I told Marco Marco doesn't handle it anymore." The man set a card on her table. The crest stamped on it made her blood run cold. A black lion, Morelli territory. "Debt's been transferred. You'll hear instructions tomorrow." When he left, the air felt thinner. She sank to the floor, staring at the card. She knew what it meant. Nobody escaped a Morelli debt. She curled up beside her bed, tears sliding silently. "Please," she whispered into the dark, "just one quiet life. That's all I want." Across the city, Victor Morelli loosened his tie and poured a glass of scotch that burned as it went down. The ballroom echoed faintly below his penthouse, the laughter of his guests drifting through the marble halls. He should have felt satisfied. 120 women, all powerful alliances waiting for him to pick one. And yet the only thing echoing in his mind was the image of a trembling girl spilling champagne, eyes like frightened glass. Victor set the glass down. "I've seen that face before," he muttered. From the corner, Gunnar leaned against the wall, expression flat. "You look like hell, boss." Victor shot him a half-smile. "Do I? You hate these events. You only do them so the council thinks you care about alliances. They need to believe I still play their game." He exhaled smoke from the cigar he hadn't lit. "But I saw something tonight, that waitress, the way she looked at me." Gunnar frowned. "The one who dropped the tray?" Victor nodded once. "She looked like she'd already been punished before I said a word." "Boss, don't start that savior complex again." Gunnar's voice was low but edged. "You can't protect everyone you pity." Victor turned to the window. Below, Verona's lights sprawled across the dark like scattered embers. "My mother said the same thing," he murmured. "But she still died protecting someone she shouldn't have." The silence thickened. Gunnar shifted. "You're thinking of her again." "She wanted me to find something pure in this rotten world," Victor said quietly. "Said if I could protect it, maybe I'd still have a soul left." His jaw flexed. "But purity doesn't survive long around men like me." Gunnar straightened, eyes hard. "Then stay away from it. You start caring, and that's when they'll use her against you." Victor didn't answer. He picked up the black lion seal on his desk, a small emblem carved with his family crest, and turned it in his hand. "Maybe that's the test, Gunnar. Maybe it's not about avoiding trouble, but proving I can guard what I own." Gunnar shook his head. "You talk like your father." Victor's expression darkened. "No. He guarded power. I guard people." Outside, thunder rolled across the city. By dawn, Teresa was back at work. Her eyes stung from sleeplessness, but she'd learned to move through exhaustion like a shadow, silent, unnoticed. The ballroom was empty now, the aftermath of the previous night hidden beneath cleaning supplies. Broken glass glittered across the floor like fallen stars. A young maid knelt nearby, barely 16, crying quietly as she tried to scrub a wine stain out of the carpet. Teresa watched her for a moment, then set her own bucket down and poured water into the girl's hands. "Here," she whispered. "Start from the edge. Don't press too hard. It'll fade." The girl blinked at her through tears. They said I ruined the fabric. You didn't. Teresa smiled faintly. It's just a mark. Marks fade. The girl nodded, clutching the cloth like it was hope itself. Neither of them noticed the man watching from the upper balcony. Victor stood there, coat draped over his shoulders, a cigarette burning unnoticed between his fingers. He'd come down early to inspect the cleanup, but the sight below stopped him cold. The same waitress, kneeling in silence, comforting someone else despite her own bruises. There it was again, that quiet defiance he couldn't name. Gunnar joined him, voice low. You're staring again. Victor didn't look away. Tell me who she is. Probably just staff. You don't need to. I said find out. His tone sharpened. Name, records, everything. Gunnar exhaled slowly. You really want to open that door? Victor flicked ash from his cigarette, eyes still fixed on the girl below. It's already open. Later that afternoon, as the sky bruised toward evening, Teresa carried empty glasses through the back hall. The world felt heavy with things unsaid. When she passed the mirrored wall, she caught a glimpse of herself. The dark circles under her eyes, the fading bruise on her wrist, the girl who'd promised never to look at anyone long enough to be seen. She didn't know that somewhere above her, the man she feared most already remembered her face, and that remembering would change everything. The night glittered louder than thunder. The ballroom of the Morelli Grand pulsed with power, diamonds gleaming like tiny promises of destruction, laughter sharp enough to cut glass. Teresa wove through the maze of gowns and suits, balancing a tray heavy with crystal flutes. She'd hoped the night would end quietly. That hope shattered with a single splash. The wine hit silk. It spread across the back of Marnie Bellucci's pale gown like a bloodstain. Gasps rippled through the hall, echoing against marble. The woman turned slowly, her jeweled lips curling. You clumsy little nobody. Her voice sliced the music in two. Teresa's hands trembled, eyes darting toward the floor. I'm sorry, ma'am. Sorry? Marnie laughed, cold and high. Do you know what this costs? Teresa stepped back, stammering. I'll pay for it, please, Marnie's hand cracked across her cheek before the sentence finished. The sound rang out like a gunshot. The room fell silent, every gaze fixed on the trembling waitress and the woman who'd struck her. Do you think I'm him? Marnie sneered, her voice dripping venom. Do you think you're Victor, letting people walk away after embarrassing him, is that it? You think because he looked at you once you matter? Teresa's throat closed. She could taste blood, taste humiliation. The weight of 100 stares pressed down on her until she thought she might vanish under it. But she didn't. Because a voice cut through the music then, low, dangerous, and final. That's enough. The orchestra stilled. Marnie turned, her smile faltering. Victor Morelli stood at the top of the stairs, black suit unbuttoned, eyes cold as midnight steel. The crowd parted instinctively as he descended, each step deliberate, heavy with the kind of power that didn't need volume. Victor, Marnie began, her tone softening. She ruined... In my world, he said, voice smooth as ice. Only cowards raise hands to the weak. The words landed like a verdict. Murmurs erupted, sharp whispers spreading through the crowd. Marnie's face drained of color. She's just a servant, she snapped, her confidence trembling. She should... Victor's gaze cut her short. Leave. Excuse me. He didn't repeat himself. A guard had already appeared beside her, waiting. The sight sent a ripple of disbelief through the room. Marnie's hands fluttered helplessly, her pride collapsing as the guard gestured toward the exit. Humiliation flashed in her eyes before she stormed away, her entourage trailing like frightened shadows. Teresa stood frozen, one hand against her cheek, unable to breathe. Victor turned his attention to her. The heat of that gaze burned through the noise. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. She shook her head, words trapped somewhere behind her ribs. He studied her a moment longer, the corner of his mouth twitching, something almost human flickering there before his face hardened again. "Clean this up," he said to the nearest attendant, then walked away without another glance. But his jaw was tight as he left, and those who knew him well saw the subtle crack in his composure. Backstage, the air was cooler, quieter. The storm of whispers still echoed from the ballroom, each one twisting the story further. Teresa stood alone near the service corridor, trying to slow her heartbeat. The slap still burned across her skin, but it wasn't the pain that unsettled her. It was the memory of his eyes, how they'd looked at her. Not pity, not curiosity. Something else. The staff whispered as she passed. "Did you hear what he said? He defended her. Marnie's finished. That waitress is dead next." Teresa ignored them all. She just wanted to disappear, finish the night, and never see him again. But the moment she turned the corner, she froze. He was there. Victor stood near the marble counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands braced against the table like he was holding himself back. A single overhead light carved the room into silver and shadow. Teresa lowered her gaze immediately. "Sir, your debt has been paid?" His voice was calm, but the question hit like a gunshot. She blinked, confused. "My, what?" "Your debt," he repeated. "The one your ex-boyfriend left hanging when he ran." Her breath caught. "How do you—" "I know everything that happens in my city." He picked up a document from the counter and held it out. "His name was Marco Vance, correct?" Her throat went dry. "Yes. He sold your debt to one of my men 2 months ago." Victor's tone was almost casual, but his eyes weren't. "That means, as of this morning, you belong to me." She staggered back a step. "What? No, that can't be. I just bought it." "Why?" Her voice cracked. He studied her, the silence stretching between them. "Because the kind of men who buy debts like yours don't stop at threats. They break bones. Or worse. I don't allow that in my territory." She stared at him, trembling. "So what are you saying? I'm supposed to thank you?" A muscle flicked in his jaw. "I'm saying your freedom has a new owner, and I don't intend to sell it." Teresa's eyes widened. "That's not freedom." "No," he agreed softly. "But it's safety." She shook her head, taking another step back. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His voice dropped lower, quiet enough to sound like a secret. "You work double shifts. You send money to a sister who doesn't answer your calls. You eat once a day. You don't drink. And you wear long sleeves, even when it's hot." The world spun. "You had me followed. I had you protected." Her pulse pounded. "Why? Why would you do that?" He stepped closer, the air tightening. "Because sometimes," he said, "the things that look fragile are the ones that survive what no one else could." Her breath hitched. "You think that makes me yours?" His gaze softened, only slightly. "No," he murmured. "But it makes you mine to watch over." The room felt smaller, the air heavy with something neither dared name. The echo of the slap, the humiliation, the danger, they all tangled together until she could hardly tell fear from something else. She whispered, "Please, don't make this harder." Victor's hand flexed at his side. "It already is." Then he turned away, his expression shutting down like a door. "You'll get instructions from my office tomorrow. For now, go home." She hesitated, then fled down the corridor, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. Behind her, Victor stayed where he was, staring at the empty doorway long after she'd gone. Gunnar appeared from the shadows, arms folded. "You just made her yours. That'll make enemies." Victor's mouth curved into something between a smile and a warning. "Let them come." He looked toward the hall where she'd vanished, and for the first time in years, the man who ruled by fear realized he'd just found something he couldn't control. The Morelli estate stood on the cliffs above Verona Bay, a fortress of glass and stone overlooking a city that trembled in Victor's shadow. Teresa had never seen anything like it. The gates opened for her in silence, and for the first time in her life, someone else carried her bag. She'd been summoned, not asked. The message had come that morning. Report to the Morelli residence. You'll receive instructions there. She had tried to say no, to find some loophole in the debt contract now stamped with Victor's seal, but there wasn't one. So she came, walking through a house that smelled of cedar and money, terrified of what awaited her inside. Caretaker, the guard had said curtly. You'll help with the house staff, nothing else. But the first thing she saw wasn't staff. It was him. Victor stood on the terrace, the sea wind flattening his black shirt against his frame. He didn't turn when she stepped out. You came, he said. You gave me no choice. Now he turned. Slowly, deliberately, and something about his gaze made her heart falter. There's always a choice, he murmured. But few people take it. Her fingers clenched around her apron. What do you want from me, Mr. Morelli? To see if I can trust you, he said simply, and to see if you can stand being near me. Days bled into one another. Teresa learned the rhythm of the mansion, the quiet hum of surveillance cameras, the whispers of guards who never smiled, the sharp scent of cigar smoke that followed Victor wherever he went. She worked silently, cleaning rooms that looked more like museums than homes. But sometimes, when she thought no one noticed, she caught glimpses of the man behind the name. Victor at the piano late at night, playing melodies too sad to belong to a criminal. Victor in the garden, kneeling to feed the stray dog that refused to leave his gates. Victor standing at the window when the storms rolled in, watching lightning like it was something personal. Once, she found him bleeding. It was near midnight. A gunshot had echoed in the distance earlier, but she'd forced herself to stay in her room. Now, drawn by instinct, she found him in the study, his hand pressed to a gash near his ribs. Blood seeped through his white shirt. Teresa froze. You're hurt. He glanced up, expression unreadable. It's nothing. You'll die if I believe that, she snapped, grabbing a towel from the bar. He stared at her, surprised by the sharpness in her tone. You talk to me like I'm human. Bleeding doesn't make you less powerful, she muttered, kneeling beside him. It just means you're alive. She pressed the towel against his side. His breath caught. You shouldn't be this close to me. Then stop bleeding, she whispered. The room fell quiet except for the sound of the waves hitting the cliffs below. When she looked up, his eyes were on her, steady, unreadable, and filled with something dangerously tender. The rumors started 2 days later. Marnie, humiliated and exiled from the gala, was back in the city. Whisper by whisper, she began her revenge, feeding tabloid stories about a secret mistress hidden in the Morelli mansion. At first, Victor ignored it, but the whispers grew teeth. Business partners hesitated. Politicians questioned his alliances. The council, the circle of crime families who balanced power, demanded answers. You can't ignore this, said Gunnar, his voice like gravel. They think you're losing control. They want a clean marriage. Someone respectable. Victor's jaw tightened. They want a puppet. They want stability, Gunnar said evenly. If you don't pick someone soon, they'll pick for you. From the hall, Teresa paused with the tray she carried. Their voices drifted through the half-open door. She's not one of us, Gunnar continued. That waitress, if people think you've taken her in, it'll be war. You can't protect her forever. She doesn't need my protection, Victor said. She just needs to be left alone. That's not how this world works. A pause, then Victor's voice. Low, certain, final. I'd rather stay alone than marry snakes. Teresa's breath hitched. The tray shook in her hands, glass clinking. She stepped back before either man could notice her, her chest tight. She didn't understand why his words hurt more than they comforted. That night the storm returned. The electricity flickered, thunder shaking the glass walls of the mansion. Teresa couldn't sleep. She went to the terrace for air, pulling his jacket tighter around her shoulders. It had been left carelessly on the railing earlier, and she'd borrowed it without thinking. Footsteps approached. "You shouldn't be out here," Victor said behind her. She didn't turn. "You shouldn't keep your windows open during a storm." "Neither of us listens well." He came to stand beside her. Rain streaked the glass around them, the lightning reflecting off his face. "You overheard," he said simply. She tensed. "I wasn't." "You did." His voice softened. "And I meant what I said. I don't need another alliance. I need peace." Teresa finally turned toward him. "Peace doesn't live in places like this." He studied her face. "It might, if you do." The words hung between them, impossible to ignore. The next day he took her to the training grounds behind the estate, a hidden range where the sound of gunfire couldn't reach the city. He placed a pistol in her hands. "If you're going to work for me, you should know how to protect yourself." "I clean tables," she murmured. "You're in my house. That makes you a target." His hands came around hers, guiding her aim. The heat of his touch sent a jolt through her, steadier than fear, heavier than she wanted to admit. "Don't flinch," he whispered near her ear. "The gun listens to your heartbeat. Make it obey you." She pulled the trigger. The recoil surprised her, but the bullet hit the center of the target. He smiled, just barely. "Good." "I hate it," she said, shaking her hand. "Good again. Hate keeps you human." When she turned to look at him, he was already watching her. Not like a boss, not like a savior. Like a man on the edge of something he couldn't afford to feel. That evening, the wound on his ribs tore open again. She found him in the hallway, swaying slightly, the bandage darkening. "Sit down," she ordered, grabbing the first aid kit. He tried to protest, but she pushed him onto the couch. The air between them pulsed. Her fingers brushed his skin as she cleaned the cut. He inhaled sharply. "You should have called someone," she said. "I did," he murmured. "You came." Her hands paused. He caught her wrist gently, eyes locking onto hers. "You don't have to fear me, Teresa." "I don't," she whispered. "That's the problem." For a long moment, neither moved. Outside, the rain eased into silence, and somewhere deep in the house, a clock struck midnight. Teresa never should have entered his office. She knew it the moment the door closed behind her. The study smelled like him. Cedar, smoke, and something darker. Shadows stretched long across the marble floor, moonlight spilling through the tall windows. She had only meant to leave his tea, but curiosity had its own heartbeat, and tonight it was louder than her fear. A stack of folders sat open on the desk. Official, stamped with the Morelli seal. The top sheet bore Victor's name, inked signatures, legal notices, bloodlines, clauses. But one phrase caught her eye and held her there like a chain. "Under no circumstances may the heir form an alliance or union with a common-born individual, under penalty of forfeiting inheritance and control of the Morelli syndicate." Her hand trembled as she traced the cold words. Her stomach turned. So that was it. The reason behind the distance, the guarded silences, the looks that burned and vanished before they could mean anything. She'd been a distraction, a game against loneliness. The sound of footsteps froze her in place. She turned just as the door opened. Victor stood there, his expression unreadable in the low light. "You shouldn't be here." Teresa swallowed, clutching the paper in her fist. "No," she said quietly, "but apparently neither should I be anywhere near you." He didn't move. His jaw tightened. "Put that down." Her laugh broke like glass. "Why? Does the contract burn if someone poor touches it?" "Teresa, you made me think I mattered." Her voice cracked. "You let me patch your wounds, cook your meals, talk to you like I was something real. And all this time you knew. You knew there was a rule written to keep people like me beneath your shoes." He took a step forward. You don't understand. Then make me. Silence filled the space between them, sharp, electric, trembling. He exhaled slowly, like a man fighting something he didn't want to unleash. Do you think I wanted you here? His voice hit the air like thunder. Do you think I asked for this? Her throat went dry. I've been trying to stay away from you for months, he said, voice rough, raw. Every time you walk into a room, it gets harder. Every time you look at me like I'm not a monster, I forget what I am. And that, he pointed at the paper in her hand, is the reminder I keep in front of me so I don't ruin you. Her heart thudded painfully. You already did. The silence that followed was too long, too alive. His gaze found hers, fierce and desperate all at once. Then let me finish the job, he whispered. Before she could speak, he crossed the distance. 1 second there was space between them. The next, her back hit the edge of the desk, and his mouth was on hers. The kiss was fire and fury. Too much of everything they'd been denying. She tried to push him away, but her hands betrayed her, gripping his shirt instead. His breath trembled against her lips. For a heartbeat, the world disappeared. No contracts, no rules, no syndicates, just two broken people clinging to something forbidden. When he finally tore himself back, he looked wrecked. That's why, he said hoarsely. That's why I keep my distance. Teresa stood there, stunned, breathing hard. You think this makes it better? No, he said. It makes it real. Her pulse thundered in her ears. What happens now? You lock me up somewhere safe while you go marry one of your marble-faced socialites? He didn't answer. He turned away, pacing to the window. The city lights painted his silhouette in gold and shadow. You weren't supposed to find that, he said quietly. It's my father's will. His dying obsession. But I'll do what my heart wants. She frowned. Obsession? He swore to my mother that the family name would never mix with the world she came from. He believed her death was punishment for marrying beneath her status. His voice faltered, softer now. To honor her memory, he bound me to a deadline. I must be engaged by the end of this year, to a woman of blood and title, or lose everything. Teresa stared at him, disbelief and heartbreak crashing together. You're telling me your father's ghost owns you? I'm telling you I've spent my life trying not to become him, he said, finally turning back to her. And you? His hand lifted helplessly, fingers curling into a fist. You make me want everything he forbade. Her eyes burned. Then why not fight it? Because loving you could destroy you. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. You don't get to decide what destroys me. His gaze softened, regret flickering behind it. You don't know what's out there, Teresa. This world doesn't forgive weakness, and they already think you are mine. I'm not to be with a commoner who doesn't have knowledge about my world. But I promise to protect you. She froze. What do you mean? He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. There's talk, he admitted. A rival syndicate, the Markellos. They've been watching. They think you're leverage. Leverage? She whispered. They believe hurting you would break me. His tone hardened. They're not wrong. Her pulse spiked. So that's it then. You kiss me, then send me away before someone else can? He shook his head. I'll protect you. By keeping me locked up? By keeping you alive. She stepped closer, eyes wet with anger. You can't live your whole life behind walls, Victor. Neither can I. He looked at her for a long time, the kind of look that stripped both of them bare. Then I'll build you walls strong enough to keep the world out, he murmured. Maybe I don't want them. His hand brushed her cheek before she could move. You will. The quiet that followed was unbearable. Outside, the storm began again, wind howling across the cliffs like an omen. Teresa stepped back, shaking her head. You think you can control everything. Even me. I don't want to control you, he said, voice breaking. I want to keep you breathing. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of the truth sat heavy between them. The will, the kiss, the danger tightening like a noose. Finally, she turned toward the door, her voice trembling but firm. Then you'd better learn what you're fighting for, Victor. Because if they come for me, I won't hide behind your name. He didn't stop her. He just watched as she walked away, her silhouette fading into the darkness of the hall. When the door clicked shut, Victor leaned against the desk, his hands shaking. The paper she'd dropped lay at his feet, soaked with a single tear. He bent, picked it up, and whispered to the empty room, "You're already my ruin." Outside, in the shadows beyond the estate walls, a car engine idled. Inside it, a man in a dark coat spoke into a phone. "She's in the house," he said. "Tell the boss we found his weakness." If you've made it this far, you already feel it. The pull between danger and devotion. Hit subscribe right now and join the ones who never miss a heartbeat of stories like this. And tell me, would you risk everything for love like Teresa and Victor did? It began with a picture. One photograph, grainy, out of focus, but damning enough to set fire to the empire. Teresa didn't even know it existed until she saw it on the morning news. Her image, laughing, head tilted toward Victor, plastered across a tabloid headline that screamed, "The Mafia King's mistress, the waitress who stole his heart." Dozens of photos followed, each worse than the last. Victor's coat draped over her shoulders, his hand on her back as they left the shooting range, the two of them sharing a look that no one could mistake for anything but intimacy. What the world didn't see was the truth. The grainy photos had been altered. Marnie had made sure of that. By noon, Teresa couldn't step outside without hearing her name whispered like poison. The staff looked away. The guards avoided her. The kitchen girls stopped speaking when she passed. She packed her few belongings in silence. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. But promises meant little when the world decided you didn't deserve dignity. "I'm leaving," she whispered to the empty room, her voice breaking. "He'll be better off without me." Her heart said otherwise. It screamed his name, begged her to stay. But pride was the only armor she had left. She slipped through the back gate of the Morelli estate at dusk, hood pulled low, rain soaking through her clothes. The guard didn't stop her. Maybe he'd been told to look away. Maybe Marnie's rumors had already done their job. Inside the mansion, chaos reigned. The lieutenants had gathered in Victor's office, voices clashing like blades. "You've lost your mind, Victor," one shouted. "Those photos are everywhere. The council's laughing. You're protecting a woman who's ruined your name." Another slammed a fist on the table. "She's a liability. If she's alive, she's a target. If she's dead, you'll still take the blame." Victor said nothing. He stood by the window, rain streaking the glass behind him. His reflection looked like a ghost, haunted, furious, and hollow all at once. Gunnar stood nearest to him, jaw tight. "They're right about one thing, boss. She's in danger. You can't protect her if you don't even know where she is." Victor turned slowly. His eyes were dark, wild. "What did you say?" "She left," Gunnar said quietly. "Slipped out an hour ago." The words landed like bullets. Victor's glass shattered against the wall. "Find her. She doesn't want to be found." Victor grabbed his coat, ignoring the blood seeping through the bandage at his side. "She belongs under my protection. As long as she breathes, that's where she'll stay." But the moment he stepped outside, thunder rolled, and fate struck first. Teresa didn't make it far. The van came out of nowhere, black windows, no plates. Hands grabbed her before she could scream, a cloth over her mouth. The world went black. When she woke, the air was heavy with gasoline and rot. She was tied to a chair in a dim warehouse, her wrists raw against the ropes. A single light swung overhead. Two men stood in the shadows. One spoke with a thick accent. "So this is the famous waitress." She didn't answer. She doesn't look like much, the others sneered, circling her. Hard to believe the Morelli heir would risk everything for a girl like this. Teresa bit her lip, refusing to show fear. You'll regret touching me. The first man laughed. You sound like him. He leaned closer. You think he'll come for you? He might. But by the time he does, you'll already be a message. Back at the mansion, the storm inside Victor finally broke. Enough, he growled, sweeping the contracts off his desk. Every one of you sits here counting profits while she's out there bleeding because of me. Because of you, Gunnar shot back. The family's in chaos. You're throwing away everything your father built for some girl you barely know. Victor turned on him, voice low and shaking. Don't you dare. You think burning the world for her makes you strong? It makes you a fool. Victor's hand went to the drawer. He pulled out the old envelope, the one with his father's seal, and tore it open. The will. The contract that had dictated every chain around his life. Then I'll lose everything, he said, voice raw, but not her. He struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash in his hands. Gunnar's jaw tightened. You just declared war. Then war it is. In the warehouse, the night dragged on. Teresa's head throbbed. Blood trickled from her lip. She could barely lift her eyes when the man grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. You're quiet, he mocked. Maybe we should send him something to make him louder. A finger, perhaps? She didn't flinch. Nothing to say? He taunted. Her voice was a whisper. If you touch me again, he'll bury you. The man laughed, backhanding her hard enough to make her vision blur. Let him come. Her cheek burned. The room spun. But even as her body sagged against the ropes, she whispered his name under her breath like a prayer. Victor. It was all she had left. At that same hour, Victor's convoy tore through the rain, headlights slicing the darkness. Warehouse district, Gunnar said, loading his gun. Marcello's have half the docks under lockdown. We won't get close without blood. Then we bleed, Victor replied. Boss, listen to me. Gunnar's voice cracked. One girl isn't worth a war. Victor's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. She's worth mine. He pressed harder on the gas. The thunder swallowed his words, but Gunnar heard them, felt them, and knew nothing would stop him now. In the warehouse, Teresa drifted in and out of consciousness. She saw the door creak open, the men stepping away, voices rising outside. She couldn't make out the words, just the tone, anger, disbelief, fear. Then gunfire, loud, close. The rope snapped under a knife. Warm hands caught her before she hit the floor. Teresa, her eyes fluttered open. For a second, she thought she was dreaming. His voice sounded like something from another world. Victor? I've got you, he whispered, pulling her close. Tears burned her bruised cheeks. You shouldn't have come. He looked at her then, blood on his collar, fury and love burning in equal measure. You're the only reason I came. Outside, the sirens began to wail. The city had heard the gunfire, but in that moment, neither of them cared. Teresa clung to him, her voice barely a breath. I thought you wouldn't find me. Victor pressed his forehead to hers. I'd burn the world to find you. Rain still lashed against the city when Victor slammed his fist on the steel table. Maps were spread before him, ports, alleys, safe houses, all red-marked with failed leads. His empire was fracturing, his men whispering about revolt, and the woman he loved was still missing. Then Delora walked in. No one ever heard her arrive, only the click of her heels and the smell of smoke trailing her coat. She was the best information broker in the underground, and tonight her eyes held an answer. I found her, she said. Victor's head snapped up. Where? Warehouse 47, East Docks. The Marcellos are holding her for trade. They plan to move her by dawn. The room went still. Gunnar leaned forward. That's a death trap. They've fortified that whole block. Victor's voice was low, steady, terrifying. Then we burned the block. They moved at midnight, 3 black cars, rain slicing through the dark. Inside the lead vehicle, Gunnar checked his weapon while Victor loaded his with shaking hands he refused to acknowledge. "Boss," Gunnar said quietly, "we go in fast, we get her out, and we get out alive. No heroics." Victor looked out at the blur of wet streets. "She saved me once," he murmured. "When she looked at me like I wasn't the monster they say I am. That's worth a few heroics." The docks were silent except for the creak of cranes and the slap of waves. They parked half a mile out. Rain disguised their footsteps as they slipped through the shadows. From a distance they could see the warehouse lights, dozens of guards, armed and waiting. Gunnar muttered, "Looks like the council gave the Marcellos permission. They want to see you bleed." Victor's jaw tightened. "Then they'll see fire instead." He raised his hand. His men fanned out, silencers ready. The first shots were whispers, guards dropping before alarms could scream. But the quiet didn't last. A siren blared and the night exploded into chaos. Inside, Teresa flinched at the sound of gunfire. She was still tied, but she'd loosened the ropes enough to cut her wrists raw. A guard shouted outside. Then another fell silent mid-cry. Her heart thundered. The door burst open. A shadow filled the frame. "Teresa!" She blinked through the dim light, his voice, raw and desperate. "Victor?" He was at her side in seconds, knife slashing the ropes, arms catching her as she fell forward. "You're hurt." "I'm alive," she whispered, "because you came." Before he could answer, a gunshot split the air. They dove for cover as bullets shredded crates. Gunnar and 2 men stormed in behind Victor, returning fire. The air filled with smoke and splinters. "Go!" Gunnar yelled. "Get her out! I'll hold the back line!" Victor grabbed Teresa's hand. "Run!" But halfway through the corridor, another guard emerged, aiming at Gunnar's back. Teresa didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed a broken pipe and struck the man across the head before he could fire. The sound echoed, metal against bone. Gunnar spun, wide-eyed. "What the hell, girl?" Teresa's breath came ragged. "I told you I'm not dead weight." Victor looked at her like he'd never seen her before. Blood on her hands, courage blazing through fear. "You just saved my right hand," he said softly. She wiped a trembling tear from her cheek. "Then make it mean something." They fought their way out. Every corner was another ambush, another explosion of sound and fury. Victor's men moved like shadows, precise and silent, but the Marcellos kept coming. At the docks, flames licked the edges of oil drums. Gunnar covered their retreat, firing until the last bullet clicked empty. "Go, boss," he shouted. "Boat's ready." Victor half-carried Teresa toward the pier, smoke burning their throats. The world behind them roared with fire. When they finally reached the boat, Victor helped her aboard. She turned back, eyes glistening in the flicker of burning docks. "You came for me," she said, "even after everything." He met her gaze, drenched, shaking. "There was never a world where I wouldn't." Her voice trembled. "Why? You could have chosen safety, power, anyone else." He stepped closer. "Because every time you look at me, I remember what it's like to be human." The engine roared to life. The city lights blurred behind them. By dawn, they reached a small safe house far from the city, an abandoned vineyard overlooking the misty hills. Gunnar stayed behind with the men to cover their tracks. Inside, the fire crackled low. Teresa sat near the flames, hands wrapped around a mug Victor had found in the cupboard. Her hair was matted with rain and soot, her face streaked with tears and dirt. But to him, she looked unbreakable. He crouched in front of her. "You shouldn't have risked yourself back there." "I wasn't going to watch someone die for me," she said quietly. "You might live by power, Victor, but I don't. Not anymore." He smiled faintly, pain flickering beneath it. "You talk like you're not scared." "Oh, I'm terrified," she admitted, voice trembling. "But I'm done running from fear." Silence stretched between them, filled with the hiss of the fire. Finally, she said, "I'm not a pawn. If I stand beside you, it'll be by choice." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then choose." Her breath caught. "You already know my choice." For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then his hand cupped her cheek, and she leaned into it, eyes closing as if surrendering to something inevitable. Outside, dawn broke over the hills, a thin line of gold across the horizon. Victor whispered, "We fight together now." Teresa looked up at him, a quiet smile forming through exhaustion. "Then let's make them remember who we are." He took her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart still thundered. "They'll never forget." The fire crackled, warming the space where two bruised souls finally stood on even ground. No longer a king and a servant, not a captor and his rescued prize, but equals forged in the same storm. And for the first time, Victor Morelli smiled without a trace of armor. The night was supposed to be a peace offering. Victor had called it an engagement ceremony, a public declaration to silence the council and end the whispers that he had lost control. The chandeliers of the Morelli Grand Hall glimmered like constellations, the same hall where everything had once begun. But beneath the shine and crystal, the air was heavy with tension, with the scent of gun oil masked beneath roses. Teresa stood at the edge of the stage in a simple black dress that hugged her trembling frame. She was no longer the maid who cowered in corners, yet her eyes, sharp and steady now, kept scanning every shadow. Victor's men filled the perimeter, Gunner among them, his jaw tight with unease. And then there were the guests, dons, lieutenants, council members, and the 120 women who had once competed for Victor's ring. Tonight, they were little more than ghosts in sequins, watching the man they'd once wanted belong entirely to someone else. Victor approached the podium, his presence commanding silence. His black suit was immaculate, his movements slow, deliberate. The sapphire ring, his mother's, gleamed faintly in his breast pocket. "Tonight," he said, voice echoing against marble and gold, "I close the door on every false alliance, every staged affection, every political marriage." He looked at Teresa, and something softened in his expression. "Because power without loyalty is empty, and I've had enough of emptiness." The room stirred. Murmurs spread like static. Somewhere in the back, Marnie's lips curved into a cold smile. Outside, engines purred. Unmarked vans rolled to a stop at the hall's side entrance. The Marcellos had come. Marnie's final play was in motion. She pressed a small transmitter against her ear. "Wait for my cue," she whispered to her hired soldiers. "Let's ruin his perfect fairy tale." Inside, Victor reached for Teresa's hand, their fingers brushing like a vow made in secret. The world around them blurred, until a sudden crack split the air. Gunfire, glass shattered, screams erupted, the chandeliers burst into rainstorms of crystal and flame. The first bullet grazed Victor's shoulder. He staggered, pulling Teresa down behind the overturned banquet table. "Stay down," Gunner barked, returning fire. "They're inside." Smoke filled the ballroom as chaos spread. Marnie's laughter rang sharp through the confusion. "Did you really think love would save you, Victor?" Victor rose halfway, clutching his bleeding arm. His eyes found Marnie through the haze, standing near the staircase, pistol in hand, sequins glinting like shards of glass. "Marnie," he called, voice low but steady. "You always wanted to be seen. Well, the world's watching now." Her face twisted with fury. "You ruined me." "No," he said coldly, stepping forward. "You ruined yourself." The rival syndicate burst through the windows. Marcellos, masked and armed. A gunman aimed for Victor's chest. Teresa saw it before he did. She moved without thought, shoving him aside just as the bullet tore through the space where his heart had been. The impact knocked her backward. "Teresa!" Victor caught her before she hit the floor. The bullet had missed, but barely. He pressed her close, eyes burning with something raw and violent. "You stay with me. Do you hear me?" She nodded weakly. "Always." Then the walls shook. The Marcellos had set explosives at the entry. The hall was turning into a battlefield. Gunnar dragged Victor up. "Boss, we've got 5 minutes before this place goes up." Victor's gaze hardened. "Then we end this in 4. He stormed through the fire and smoke, every step deliberate. His men covered him as he advanced on Marnie and her backers. She tried to retreat, but he was faster, disarming one guard, slamming another into the marble. The final rival leader, Don Rico Marcello, stepped forward with a sneer. "So this is the lover boy," Rico taunted. "All this blood for a waitress." Victor's eyes darkened. "For my woman." They clashed. Fists, gunfire, blood. Rico drew a knife, slashing across Victor's ribs. Victor countered, driving the blade into Rico's chest with brutal precision. "This," Victor said through his teeth, twisting the handle, "is for every woman you broke, and every man who forgot what loyalty means." Rico fell, gasping, as the hall blazed around them. Marnie tried to flee, heels slipping in the chaos. But when she reached the doors, Victor's men were already there. Gunnar held her at gunpoint. "It's over," he said coldly. "The boss makes the rules now." Victor turned away from her without a word. He'd wasted enough of his soul on ghosts. He limped toward Teresa, who was still by the overturned table, coughing through the smoke. Her eyes widened when she saw him, bloodied but alive. "You're insane," she whispered as he knelt beside her. He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm yours." The ceiling cracked overhead. Time was running out. Sirens wailed in the distance, the police, the fire brigade, maybe even the council's cleanup crew. Victor reached into his jacket, pulling out a small velvet box. Scorched, but intact. Teresa blinked through tears. "Victor, now?" He opened it. Inside lay the sapphire ring that had once belonged to his mother. Deep blue, untouched by smoke or flame. "You were the only choice that ever mattered," he said, voice steady despite the destruction. "Everything else, the power, the empire, the women, they were distractions, but you." He took her trembling hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. "You were real." Tears streaked her soot-stained cheeks. "You're proposing in the middle of a war zone?" He laughed hoarsely. "Then it's fitting, isn't it? We were born in fire." She pressed her forehead to his. "Yes," she breathed. "I'll marry you." Behind them, Gunnar shouted, "Boss, we've got to go!" Victor lifted her into his arms. "We're done here." They burst out into the night as the Morelli Grand Hall collapsed behind them in a roar of light and ash. The council's banners burned. The women who had once competed for Victor's attention scattered like smoke, their jeweled gowns no match for the reality of love forged in chaos. On the wet pavement, Victor set Teresa down, cradling her face in his bloodied hands. For the first time in years, the weight of his father's shadow lifted. The ring glinted in the rain, a sapphire against soot. "You're my home now," he whispered. Teresa smiled through the trembling. "And you're finally free." He kissed her, slow, defiant, eternal, as sirens wailed and the first light of dawn broke over the burning city. The world had changed in the weeks that followed the fire. The Morelli name, once whispered in fear, now filled headlines with disbelief. The waitress who won the Mafia king's heart. The fall and rebirth of an empire. From blood to redemption, the new era of Victor Morelli. Teresa had never asked for fame, and she avoided every camera that tried to capture her face. But there was no escaping the story. How the feared heir had turned on his own council, burned his father's laws, and rebuilt his empire beside the woman no one believed would last a day in his world. The tabloids called it scandal. The streets called it legend. But to Victor and Teresa, it was peace. The new headquarters wasn't made of marble or glass. It was a restored warehouse by the river, sunlight spilling through wide windows that once smuggled contraband. Now, the walls echoed with the sound of laughter and construction. Victor stood on the balcony overlooking his men. Men who had followed him through war, now working with their own hands to build something clean. He wore no tie, no weapon, just a crisp shirt and rolled sleeves. "Keep the south wing clear," he said to Gunnar, who stood beside him, clipboard in hand. "That'll be for the shelter deliveries." Gunnar raised a brow. "Still can't believe we're doing this. A women's shelter, boss?" Victor smirked faintly. "A house for women who were used the way this business used them? Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing." Gunnar whistled low. "Never thought I'd see the day. The great Victor Morelli, turning the trade into charity." Victor's gaze softened as it drifted toward the street below, where Teresa was stepping out of a black sedan. She wore a simple white dress, her hair in soft waves that caught the sunlight. She carried blueprints in one hand and flowers in the other. "Charity's her word," he murmured. "Mine's redemption." That afternoon they met with the builders in what would soon become House of Peace. The shelter was Teresa's dream, born from the bruises she still carried on her skin, and the deeper ones she carried in silence. It would house women escaping violence, debt, or exploitation, the same kind of women Victor's father once profited from. As she walked through the dusty hallways, Teresa paused by the old iron beams. "We'll paint them white," she said softly. "No shadows here." Victor leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You really believe this will fix the world?" "No," she said, turning to him with a small, knowing smile. "But it'll fix one piece of it. That's enough." He nodded. "Then it's done." A week later, the shelter opened. Women came, shy, trembling, carrying bags and secrets. Some couldn't speak, some couldn't meet her eyes. But Teresa greeted each one with warmth, a hand on their shoulder, and the same words she had once needed to hear. "You're safe now." Among them was a little girl named Alma, 9 years old, eyes wide, barely talking. Teresa had found her on the streets outside an old Marcello property, hiding from men who no longer existed. Alma never smiled, never danced, never looked up. Until Victor showed up one evening with a record player under his arm. The ballroom had been rebuilt. Same golden floor, same mirrored walls. The chandeliers had been repaired, their crystals glowing softly against the dusk. Victor stood in the middle of the room, the old vinyl spinning faintly on the player. He extended his hand to the girl standing hesitantly at the edge. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's a song," he said, "and songs are meant to move your feet. Here." He took her hand gently, guiding her to the center. "Step on my shoes. It's easier that way." She obeyed, tiny feet balancing on his. He began to move slowly, humming with the tune. Her head rested against his chest, and for the first time, she smiled. Up on the balcony, Teresa watched, tears glinting in her eyes. She had seen Victor kill, bleed, and nearly die. But this, watching him dance barefoot with a broken child under the same lights that once crowned cruelty, this was the moment she realized they had truly rewritten everything. He looked up and saw her, his expression softening. He mouthed, "Come down." She shook her head, smiling through tears. Instead, she whispered under her breath, "We changed the story." Later that night, when the hall was quiet and Alma had fallen asleep on a velvet chair, Victor joined Teresa on the balcony. The city glimmered below, alive but gentler now. "She laughed," he said quietly. "Alma, she actually laughed." Teresa leaned into him. "She'll laugh again tomorrow." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You think we did it, don't you?" She looked up at him, eyes shining. "You turned an empire built on fear into something that protects. You stopped the trade. You gave them homes. You even kept your promise." "What promise?" Her lips curved. "You said you'd burn the world for me." Victor smiled faintly. "I did. But then you taught me how to build it back." They stood in silence, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the glass chandeliers. "Teresa," he murmured, brushing her hair back. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't looked at you that night? She laughed softly. Then I would have still been scrubbing floors, and you'd still be pretending to have a heart of stone. He kissed her temple. You were always the only one who saw through the stone. Days turned into weeks. The council dissolved. The Marcellos vanished into history. Victor's empire, rebranded under new leadership and purpose, became known as the Morelli Foundation. Every decision, every partnership, carried Teresa's touch. And every night, when the world quieted, they returned to that ballroom, sometimes to dance, sometimes just to remember. There was no crown, no throne, no ring of diamonds, only a man and a woman who had chosen love over power and peace over pride. The newspapers eventually moved on to other stories. The legend faded into whispers again, as all legends do. But for the women in House of Peace, for the little girl who now twirled through the halls laughing, for the man who had learned mercy, and for the woman who had taught it, there was no ending, only a beginning. Teresa looked once more at the ballroom below, at the faint reflection of her and Victor moving together across the gold-lit floor, his hand resting lightly on her back. She smiled. We changed the story. Victor turned toward her, his eyes soft. No, he said. You wrote it. Thank you for listening till the end. If you believe love can rewrite even the darkest pasts, then click subscribe and share this story with someone who still believes in redemption.